That's great.
Can you see him?
I see his room.
Okay. So, welcome to the 10th reading in the Speculative Sundays poetry reading series, where every other week you can hear the poetry of possibilities. We are live on Facebook via Zoom. I'm Akua Leslie Hope speaking to you from the ancestral land of the Onondaga, also known as the Seneca, keepers of the Western Door in the southern Finger Lakes region of New York State. I pay homage to the Seneca, past, present, and future, and to my ancestors, by whose grace I exist and am sustained. This series is supported in part by the Artist Development Grant Program administered by the Arts Council of the Southern Finger Lakes and funded by the Community Foundation of Elmira Corning and the Finger Lakes. Thank you to creators and participants in this reading series. It's been one of the bright spots for me in a fraught time. Speculative poetry, the poetry of possibilities, includes alternate history, cryptids, monsters, cyberpunk dystopia, fairy tales, fabulism, fantasy, folklore, futurism, horror, magic, occult, paranormal, robots, science, fiction, shifters, slipstream, solar punk, space opera, superheroes, supernatural, sword and sorcery, sword and soul. Oh, let's see. Steampunk, time travel, post-apocalyptic, and weird. It takes all poetic forms plus sci-fi coup. My heart rockets. I'm delighted to introduce tonight's reader, Wendy Lynn Lowe. Wendy's poems, stories, and essays are published in Breaking the Silence, Desperate Acts, Hazmat Review, Napalm Health Spa, Rochester Woman, The Poet's Walk, The Democrat and Chronicle, Words on Wheels, and elsewhere. Her plays and spoken word poems have been performed through Writers and Books, Pyramid Art Center, Jiva New Play Productions, and various spoken word venues. A teacher at heart, she has more than 30 years of experience in making creative writing enjoyable and important to beginning writers and helping writers on all levels improve their craft. I can attest to that. I've seen her in action. Wendy has edited hundreds of anthologies in her years as Director of Education at Writers and Books in Rochester, New York. Welcome, Wendy. Thank you for being here.
Myself.
And for some reason, you're muted again, Wendy. Please unmute.
Um, I really appreciate everything that Kua does for the community of poetry in general and of spec poetry especially. And I have to say that when I signed up for this, I thought to myself, well, there's enough time for me to write enough poems to fill in the gaps because I don't really consider myself a spec poet. And so I was going to sign up for her class in the fall, but then the class didn't make. So I had to fall back on my own devices. Um, so I'm going to start off. I figured that if something doesn't quite fit all those other categories, that last category that Akua listed, which is weird, it'll at least hopefully fit that category. So I'm going to start off with a poem, My Mother Who Has Walked in the Moon. I ask if she doesn't mean on the moon. No, she walked into the moon. Was it Soft cheese like brie? No, it was just as you'd expect, she says, as luminous inside as out. There it was at the top of the hill. Neighbors on her dead end street to walk up the midnight hill into the moon. Once inside, it was nothing but light, says the woman who was once wedded to the scientific method. It's kind of an amazing thing. It still flips me out when I think of it. Her brow furrows. Didn't I call you when it happened? I'm sure that I would have called you. Did you say midnight, Ma? Maybe you called me and we didn't hear the phone as we were asleep upstairs. Yes, or maybe you weren't home. Or maybe we got the call and couldn't be there fast enough. That's true, because the moon might not have been there at your street. I watched the first moon landing with her. She was the only one in my family who really wished she could go. At that point, the tide was turning, and my generation was more into keeping the green planet green than exploring a dead, dusty rock. Now that she has been in the moon, it turns out the moon is not hard and barren. It is nothing like the gray shadows we saw on TV. The moon is a womb of light that my mother can walk right in. Now, something that's been happening that I've noticed with my spec poetry is that my spec poetry tends towards rhyme. And I think part of that is something that has happened to me lately, which is I'm not focusing enough on my writing. So I do a lot of my writing when I'm not near any paper. I do it in my head. And therefore it has to rhyme because I won't remember it otherwise. But this one is called Everybody Wants to Be a Robot. And I think maybe it's a song lyric in the end, but I don't write music. Everybody wants to be a robot. Nobody here is itching to stay free. Metal skin is blemish free. It's so hot. Come sit with me beneath this sweet robotic tree. Biotic life is passé in our epoch. It won't survive the future we foresee. And those bodies won't survive the global warming, but carbon steel is good past 1,000 degrees. Biologists inch forward toward immortality, while earth sciences can't seem to stop the heat. Robots seem more and more the answer. If you look at it dispassionately, they've got us mammals beat. Of course, Earth's not the only planet. Elon Musk plans colonies on Mars, but it'll take a while for him to get there. Meanwhile, we'll all be boiling in our air-conditioned cars, our air-conditioned, self-driving Tesla electric cars. Hey, why send peeps when robots would survive better on Mars? Everybody wants to be a robot. Download your wetware memories in a robot. It's better than a body, you'll agree. Forget the microchip that keeps you under their control. Come sit with me beneath this sweet robotic tree. Now, this one I wrote this week, and it's because I'm a procrastinator. And one of the ways I procrastinate is with puzzles. I try not to do puzzles. It's interesting. They say you keep your brain better if you do puzzles, but I told my doctor that if doing puzzles saved your brain, then the millions of hours my mother spent during doing puzzles would have prevented her Alzheimer's. So I don't buy it. A puzzler down the rabbit hole. I opened my laptop and got sucked into a hole. I fell and tweets emblazoned on the walls and blinking lights down through a gallery of clickbait photographs, tempting headlines, trailers for new movies, Sudoku and Mahjong pinned to a railing of my favorites. I fell through to those early hours of Bejeweled and Minesweeper, down, 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 until I reached the bottom, where sat the Soviet scientist who developed Tetris, Alexei Pajitnov, crisscross applesauce. Privyet, he said, and handed me a block. Let's play together. Let's build something and knock it down. Together we built villages and more. It all fit. Okay, and I think I'm going to switch over to paper because I'm old-fashioned, and I'll come back to this if I have to. This is the report to the Cultural Collections Committee regarding Sol 3. Olfactory arts at a primitive level, minimal tactile arts. It's aesthetically pleasing despite limited light spectrum and a pattern of involving a mere 2 or 3 of the 7 dimensions. No artistic use of colomeric may not have developed this sense due to ease and dominance of vision on a well-lit planet with little atmospheric opacity. Linguistic arts seem primarily obsessed with mating and aggression. Still many languages to sift through, though, primarily of sociobiological interest. Kinesthetic arts, pleasing despite awkward body shapes and excessive gravity, also obsessed with mating and aggression, but also community coherence. See appendix on bees. Vibrational arts of the highest interest. Am forwarding sample files, Sun Ra, Hun Her 2, and Whale Song. Expect the committee to be impressed. Await instructions to upload the entire archive. At this point, recommend no cultural outreach, as the dominant species is antagonistic to outsiders and ego fragile. Now, I contend kind of dark, so this is kind of dark. Here in 2110, only the colorless birds remain, the quick and the quiet, small and thin, hide in the bushes and hush their refrain. We forage for mushrooms or thistles or worms and those insects who are most easily caught. We must take our new life on its limited terms, which don't include moments for music or thought. And the verses that immortal poets once wrote, we laugh at the conceit. Immortal indeed. We find love poems tasteless, they stick in the throat. Who can sustain love with bellies to feed? And yet, though I know all will die, I've written this poem. I'm still human. But why? So a while back, we had some haiku, some sci-fi coup, and it got me thinking. And then I thought, oh, maybe that's something I'd like to try. And then on Facebook, every October, I used to do a Facebook haiku challenge. And I put a few haiku on in November. October was too weird. I put a couple haiku on in November, and then somebody challenged me. And in the midst of writing haiku about what was around me in November, I took a break and I said, I wonder, I'm thinking about these people who are building all these bunkers and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, okay, these people living underground are going to be human. So they may write haiku. I mean, it's not going to be their fault that their progenitors were the super rich. They're going to be human and they're going to want to be doing human things. So I've got a teenager who's learning how to write haiku. This gives me an excuse for any haiku that are not particularly good, but she's living underground. Haiku from Haiwa Sanctuary. Haiwa is Japanese for peace, and such a sanctuary does not exist. It's somebody's bunker in the Northwest, and of course they named it peace, even if it didn't come from peace. Redwood roots web through tunnel walls, holding dirt since the Anthropocene. A green glow turned the curve, and there are luminescent mushrooms. The tang of rust in a slightly cooler air. Yes, water is near. An intermittent glint beacons the steady drip from a stalactite. Smooth, moist clay melds into rough-baked bricks beneath my toes, almost home. Now this sweet acid smell of sweat, tang of iron in the breath of air. Emerged from the tunnel, our headlamps cross as we survey the glass dome. Planting day, fingering the dirt, inhaling the rich smell of earthworms. I sleep until a shrew scurries across my feet toward the storage vault. Writing on the rock all day, I can't wipe the coal dust from my cuticles. The moonlight mushrooms, newly sprayed, grayly glisten in the grow light. Summer solstice. The children craft huts of clay to block an unknown sun. The children close their eyes. The parents flap their skirts in unison as wind. In the cold, dry med cave, the old man breathes out mist, calls it a cloud. So it's an experiment. So I think, okay, this is another one that comes from that kind of imagining a future after a future after the climate becomes unsustainable. This is called She Saw the Jig Was Up. In our bunker, we are well stocked with board games, cards, and puzzles to while the time. She sits at the card table while the children sleep and rebuilds piece by piece again the landscapes of the earth. Behind the alpine scenes and scenes of children playing on the green grow scenes of hell on earth. She takes each interlocking piece back out and puts them in the box before the children wake. And I think that brings me through that set, which is the set of I needed to read, and brings me up to a couple of little bit different things. So this one is speculation around something a little weirder. Just the next town over. I've never been in Infinity, but think it would be nice to live somewhere with space to spare and never lack for spice. I'd speak with my friends endlessly and pull out all the stops on life and love and silliness until topping all tops. If you found yourself infinity, you'd ask me in, I bet. Perhaps we're all infinity and just don't know it yet. This is a concrete poem, so I'm holding it up to be, so you see its shape. It's shaped like an egg over a platform. It's called Suspension. I envision an egg on end hangs in the midst of a marble piazza, suspended in space, outside of green-leafed time's reach. The wind plays a quiet guitar, moving me, but never the egg. This, I think, is my very oldest piece of speculative poetry. And it's a song, so it might not read as well as it would if somebody could sing it, but I can't. It's called Transmigrations. Oh, to be a crow and fly away across the twilight sky. I'd keep the sunrise always in my eye if I could be a crow and fly. Oh, to be a horse and run far to meet the morning sun. I wouldn't be afraid to be alone in one if I could be a horse and run. Oh, to be a fish and swim down among the weeds and out and in. I'd jump and dive, flash, twirl and spin if I could be a fish and swim. Oh, to be a tree and grow over hill and under snow. I'd like just once before I go to turn into a tree and merely grow. Oh, to be a crow and fly black against the evening sky. I'd keep the sunset always in my eye. I wouldn't be afraid to be alone and die if I could be a crow and fly. And I think I had a couple of other things in another category. One of the things I think is always speculative poet about death. And so I'm going to give you a poem I wrote a while back based on a photograph by a friend. Mount Hope in Autumn. Mount Hope is our local cemetery for those who do not know. Mount Hope in Autumn, a lesson in perspective. The road, now yellow, gently curves, and at the bend it disappears, blends up into the canopy of leaves. As when the sea weds foggily to sky, it fools the eye. The way the gold is everywhere and soft yet crisp and floats in air, and gravity is not defined by a distinct horizon line. The light that comes through thickened air is also bent to warmer tones that can embrace almost the mournful hope that fills this burial place. The leaves spread out across the floor add yet another ceiling for the people who have come before. A lighter canopy than dirt. It cannot hurt to add such weight. And although they may come no more down to the village, something will. Forget-me-nots, life out of death, born of this incessant tillage. So too we draw nearer to infinity. So too, as we draw nearer to infinity, all edges of the road approach the vanishing point, the melding at eternity. And I think that's, I'm going to end on this one. This is a speculation not into the future, but into the past. It's called Eveline. Nostalgia is a longing for the nest. Our female halves as old as are our mothers. Got to explain that for a second. I'm going to go back and read the poem after I explain it. When your mother was born, you existed, half of you existed. Because you were an egg. All her eggs were right there when she was born. Okay, so your egg half was already there. So you're older than you think you are. If that makes you happy, I don't know. Okay. Eveline. Nostalgia is a longing for the nest. Our female halves as old as are our mothers, who carried all their eggs within them, but left back each umbilicus to wither. A man could draw a bloodline in the sand. It happens all too often. But think, feel your belly at the indent, there. Reattach that bloodline in and in and in and in, and she is there and you are there. We all are here in green, first blooming Mother Africa. And now I guess open it up to questions.
Thank you, Wendy. Bravo. I invited everyone to post questions in the chat, but I've got questions. So,
Okay.
and I get to ask first. And they haven't posted any yet. So, I wanted to, I mean, I didn't want to disrupt you. There's so often I just wanted to dialogue with you immediately. So when you talked about the why and speculative poetry, what's really curious to me, and I don't know if you share this memory, but I will tell you this. You invited me to do, for want of a better word, a speculative reading with you at the Eastman House. And we didn't call it that. I don't know if you recall, but we read poems that were basically like kind of fairy tales about animals, etc. So I hope people aren't deterred or confused by using the word speculative. It's an umbrella term, but
Yeah.
I've read and we've discussed work that you've created that's firmly in there. So,
Yeah.
and do you remember? And I remember we did research because I was looking for all these words for groups of animals. And
Was it based on a show that the Eastman House had?
maybe, I don't know if that's where age and memory fades. Like I remember that it happened. I don't remember what it was, but you said, come do this with me. And I was like, oh, this is so exciting because I love writing about, animals and whales in particular. So I love that you talked about whales. And okay, anyway. And and I and I was going to, and you actually did include several of your animal poems. So I was going to ask, were animals a thematic concern for you?
Um, it's interesting. Yes, animals, yes. I'm actually have given some thought to trying to put together a anthology of poems about um, life on the plant side, where real respect is shown for plants. Trees in particular
Well,
are,
Stevie Wonder did, remember? The Secret Life of Plants, but not
yeah,
Tim, have I seen a major creator pay that kind of attention. So that would be wonderful. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
yeah,
off.
no, but yeah, in terms of the idea of other living things um, having soul and having and maybe having something to tell us that we're not very good at listening to. So yeah, so I think that is one of the things that poetry does and did since I was a child for me, to give voice to the voiceless
Entities,
and
beings.
that were all around me, the frogs, the etc.
Yay. You're a wonderful editor. At what point in your process do you edit yourself?
Constantly. I have to tell you, I think that's one of the reasons I don't write on paper initially, is because there's a couple of things. I would get too fiddly. I like handwriting better than typing, partly because then I can see where I've fiddled with it and say, oh, you shouldn't have changed that. You should change it back. The I found at one point that I could I do what I call peripatetic composition, which is if I was walking or bicycling, I could write and then I would repeat the first 3 lines and keep going. And as long as I could keep repeating it, that meant it was memorable enough.
Hmm.
So it was editing itself out by the fact that I wasn't remembering the parts that weren't good enough. I don't know. There are poems here that have been pretty much set, and I edited at least three words in poems I thought were finished just like in the last hour.
Mhm. In the last hour. Oh my God. Oh, We've got a question from Nick. I won't beat you up about that, but anyway, uh, I enjoyed your speculative poetry about your mother. I wonder if that is by design or if creative speculation about your mom just happens for you. Does it surprise you? And do you write about your mom a lot in other types of poetry?
You know, a long time ago, I wrote some poems about my parents. My I wrote a poem about my mother and her addiction to puzzles, and how it went. It was very brief. It was something like my mother did crossword puzzles um, and played solitaire. It was thus that she knew so much of culture, both something and obscure, and of the cold, indifferent hand of luck.
Mm.
You know, but my mom has not been a major influence in the content of my work, but she was the person who told me I was a poet.
Oh,
And that's, you know, and um, she had a lot of dreams for all her kids. But the idea that I was a poet stuck, definitely stuck, and because I just delighted in it right from a very young age, and so and her father was a poet, and
mm.
that some of that was fulfilling. Her father died when she was 6. You know, the idea that I was a poet pleased her very much, but it was not, unlike some other things that she might have expected of me, there was no burden to it for me. It was like, oh yeah, okay, this I can do.
Are there any topics you actively avoid? Poetry can be cathartic, but sometimes that can get overwhelming, like any creative outlet, if the topic is emotionally charged. It's from your audience.
Ah, okay. Whew. No, no, actually, I'm not as public of a poet. I don't go out and try and get my work published as much as maybe I ought to. Um, and that keeps me open to writing whatever I dang well please. so, I don't avoid any topic. No, no, it's a good question though.
Is there a particular way or approach to thinking that your poetry, speculative or not, is intended to inspire?
Would you repeat the beginning of that? Somehow I missed it.
Is there a particular way or approach to thinking that your poetry, speculative or not, is intended to inspire?
Hmm, that's interesting. Um,
Yeah, that's an interesting question to me too.
Possibilities. One of the things that worries me about poetry is it's gotten this reputation for not being comprehensible. I think my poetry is fairly approachable, but it never bothers me to read a poem I don't think I understand because it's always got possibilities. It can stimulate some thought, and so I would say that I like to open up possibilities in my poems. That's the kind of thinking I would say. Sometimes I write stuff that is critical thinking. I have a piece here that I didn't read for you. There will always be crime in America, and that's, you know, it's basically a critical piece, and I've decided what my criticism is, and you can decide whether you want to argue with it or not. But it doesn't make, but it isn't as open to possibility. It's very short. Would you like me to read it?
Yes.
Okay. So you've got to see the title, which is There Will Always Be Crime, this letter CRIME in America. Sometimes puzzles give me some interesting stuff. The letters C, R, I, M, and E are all in America if you take the A's out. Okay, you take the A's out, you get the letters C, R, I, M, E, not in that order, but there will always be crime in America as long as that name is on the map. And Columbus's name blooms like mold on dozens of places that were already known and named. Tens of thousands of years of human exploration and settlement, tens of thousands of years of home claimed away by the stroke of a pen, a sword in the heart of what it means to be human.
That fits so well with my next question for you. You're among the few people that I know that retains and shares historic information. You're wonderful about that. How does history inform your work?
That's really interesting because history was the one subject that I could not take in high school. I was supposed to take AP history and I dropped out of it. And then I passed Regents history. I think that what happens is that I really am.
That's shocking to hear, Wendy. You're the person. You're the person. I look at a building and you'll tell me all about that building and
local history. I'm good with.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I research history constantly because I want to know what might happen, how that relates to now, and the reason I couldn't see, when you call it history, I mean, obviously, yes, duh, I do. I know a lot of history, but I don't think of it as history. I think of it as stuff. History was a subject I deplored with the exception of one class I took in Native American history, which the instructor was really, really good. And I did a project I really loved and stuff like that. But in high school, it was all about getting the correct answer. And I'm terrible with dates. I really need to put a timeline all around my office so that I can say, oh yeah, that happened in China at the same time this was happening, because dates just don't make any sense to me.
But your work seems imbued with it. So
I'm always writing about history. That's interesting because a lot of the stuff that I write, I consider, I look at moments in my own world right now that are historic. And that I know are going to be historic, and I write poetry about it now, but I want it to be poetry that will help inform people about how we are taking history as it occurs now.
My related question was, how does place inform your work?
I write a lot about place, imaginary or unimaginary. So I'm not quite sure. That's something considering that I've been to whole conferences on place in writing, I haven't really thought about it a lot. I know that I'm a kind of a stuck person. I grew up in Rochester. I shall never leave, really. I'm going to die here. Sorry, Rick, I'll come visit you. But my brother's on. Because there's I can't remember what the name of it, but there's a book where a guy took an acre around, like an acre around his house and got to know it in depth and told the geology, the paleontology, the blah, 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 blah of the, not Prairie Earth, it's a different one. But Prairie Earth is good that way. So I like that layeredness of knowing who lived next door before, the person who lived next door now. And I don't know, I like the layeredness of one place. With the internet, I can know people all over the world. But I traveled a fair amount when I was younger, and that was important. But I don't know that it's important to me as an old person. It's less important. I needed that in order to know that there was more than one way to look at the world, and that things are very different in other places, and also that things are exactly the same in other places. I needed it then to form who I am. I would love to travel now, but I don't think it's important to who I am.
When did you start writing poetry?
This is going to be very embarrassing. I started writing poetry in first grade. And the only reason that I know that is because I wrote on my father's birthday card, "I love you, yes I do." And my mother told me that was a poem. So from there,
I can relate. That's not embarrassing. I think that's beautiful.
but when I was in fifth and sixth grade, I had a very, very good sixth grade teacher. I was very lucky. I had a very good kindergarten teacher, very good sixth grade teacher for writing, and a very good 12th grade. So every 6 years, I got somebody who really got it. And she really had us writing poetry. And I remember writing then, and then going home from school where I was writing poetry and writing a long speculative poem about the fairies waking up the forest in the spring.
Mhm. Mhm.
Which I have no idea where that is now.
I was deeply enamored of the sequence of the teenage girl in the bunker. Wendy, I think that kicked butt and took numbers. That was just, for me, that was transporting. And I believe you were asked about your mother because people were deeply moved by "The Moon is a Room of Light," the poem with your mother. And even it's funny because the robot poem reminded me of, I've written a couple of robot love poems about robot guys, and they rhyme. Um, and who can sustain love when with bellies to feed? It's just really, really marvelous. I'm going to ask once more if there are any other questions, and I don't see any. Is there anything else you would like to tell us?
I would like to tell you that Nick has moved back to Rochester.
You read that.
God, I am so happy. But anyway, I just want to appreciate everybody who showed up. And I know that my brother had some hard time. That guy there, see him? All you got to do is take off the hair. We look alike. See? Okay.
Richard Lowe.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my
No,
God.
I'm really glad he got on, and my friend Ellen Marshall from Philadelphia got on. Hi, Ellen.
He's very cute.
Yeah, he is cute. He's the youngest, so
Oh, he's the baby.
he's the baby.
They always get all the good stuff, those
I
babies.
know he's got the longest eyelashes. They like go right up against his glasses, and I'm a girl, and I'm trying to put on mascara, and I'm like, how come he got the eyelashes? The joke in our family is that mother always loved Rick best. But nobody cared because we all loved Rick best too.
Oh, because he's the baby.
Oh, Fatima is here. Oh, good. Hi, Fatima. There's my sister-in-law too. Anyway, glad to have you all here, and it's going to be recorded. So if people have missed it, they can watch it another place.
Well, I thank you all for coming. I thank you, Wendy, for your wonderful reading. You should have no misgivings. You're marvelous and inclusive. And I invite everybody to join us on January 31st when our poet will be Linda Ann Loshavo. Thank you for coming out today. Stay well, be safe, peace and love. Thank you.
Thank you so much for hosting this. Bye.